Right, we're going live now.
Okay. Should we start now or like live or?
Again, you are live. You are live.
Oh, wow, great. Hafade Toru, you are watching and listening to Fanachu. I feel like I'm speaking into the void right now. But yeah, we are streaming to you live from many parts of the world. I am your host, Manny Cruz, here in Aotearoa. And with me are members of the Finogi Coalition, in diaspora and at home in Guåhan. Our show is made possible by listeners and viewers like you. And if you are in the position in this difficult time to continue supporting, then you can help keep Fanachu going by going to patreon.com/Fanachu. And any help is appreciated to keep Indigenous independent media alive, especially during this time. So yeah, we'll get into it. I mean, I haven't been on the show in quite a while, but our topic today is the Fanohge Coalition and the movement that's rebuilding after the Supreme Court turned down an appeal to hear the Davis case once again. And just for context, the Finogi Coalition, if you guys aren't familiar, was sort of born out of the energy that was built up last year. There was a very successful march that was held in September, I believe, that drew thousands of protesters there in Guåhan, marching from Adelup to the district courts. I was not there for that, unfortunately, but it looked amazing, and I really wish I was. And the guests that I have with me today, we're all part of that in some capacity or another. And so we'll get into it. So I have with me Josephine, Starlet, Sam, and Maria. Who wants to give a quick intro?
I can go. So Hafide Guapisi Sam, I got involved with the Finogi Coalition through my work with Independent Guam. And like you were saying, Manny, the coalition is really building off of the momentum of the march, in which we saw thousands of people kind of turn out for Chamoru Self-Determination, really across generations and across ethnicities. So it was this really powerful coalition. And it's really important. I think the work of this coalition is really inspiring, particularly because we have so many people from different parts of the community coming together on this issue and like pledging their support to Chamoru Self-Determination moving forward. I think what else is really inspiring about this is that it's really like youth led, and we see a lot of like youth organizers kind of coming into the work and stepping up into those spaces. What's really beautiful to me about our movement is really how much of a focus there is on like mentorship. So I've been mentored by a lot of people who have dedicated their lives to this movement and to the liberation of our people. And just to see like more youth kind of get involved is really beautiful. So I think the coalition kind of speaks to a lot of those values in our people and our movement going forward.
Let's see, Joe, you want to go next?
Yeah. Hi, everybody. My name is Josephine. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a member of Filipinos for Guåhan. I'm here to represent them. So Filipinos for Guåhan is a new group that is made up of Filipinos who have long called Guåhan home, but who have ancestral roots in the Philippines. So we're here to support and stand in solidarity for Chamoros in their ongoing struggle for self-determination. We acknowledge our similar colonial histories, but also our pre-colonial oceanic connections with Chamoros that we want to continue to restore and right historical injustices through our being part of the Finogi Coalition. So yeah, that's it.
Awesome. Nice to have you on again, Star. Oh, I think you're still on.
Good day, everyone. My name is Starlet Cruz. I'm representing Manhopen para Guåhan. We are a youth movement, and we are solid on pushing all the efforts towards decolonization, no buildup. Our mission behind the group was to, of course, advocate and spread the word among the youth, but also to create a safe space for youth to feel comfortable expressing their questions and feelings about these issues. You know, oftentimes as young people, we can get a little intimidated by the older generation. They might feel that, oh, I'm not old enough or educated or wise enough to even have an input. So we wanted to create that space where young people can feel comfortable talking to other young people that are still learning as well, and be that crossroad from youth activism to the movement as a whole. Most especially, we want to get the youth more engaged in the conversation, asking those questions, getting the youth to pay more attention and saying, hey, this is so important. So I'm really excited to keep that pushing in those efforts. Follow us on Instagram, Youth for Guam.
Awesome. I mean, that's definitely something we can talk about a lot during this episode, because obviously a huge global event really happening right now is the killing of George Floyd, and the protests that are the uprising really across the US that's taking place, and a lot of it is being mediated through social media, and there's a lot of youth engagement. So yeah, that's definitely something we can get into. Next we have Maria.
Have a day, everyone. My name is Maria Soul. First off, I just want to say thank you so much for having me on the podcast. I'm really excited to be here and to learn from everyone. I'm representing Hagan Famalao'an Guåhan. It's a Chamorro women's organization that is dedicated to fostering the health and well-being of the community. I'm also representing the GCC Eco Warriors. The GCC Eco Warriors, they fight for sustainability and teaching the community about the importance of sustainability. So yeah. Sorry.
Oh, there I am. All right, cool. All right, so without further ado, I mean, let's get into it. What is, I guess, one of the questions that I have, like looking from the outside back to my homeland, is you know, sort of the discourse that's taking place around first of all the Supreme Court turning down the appeals request, and the response to that. And so one of the things that I want to know from you guys is what's the purpose this time around with Finogi? What's different this time as opposed to last September?
Yeah, I think initially when the news broke that the Supreme Court wasn't going to pursue this, I think a lot of people in the community kind of responded with, well, that's it for self-determination, or that's it for the movement. This is kind of like the end of the road for us. But really, I think it's important, and the Fanohge Coalition is kind of urging our community to look deeper on how the issue of self-determination and decolonization really was never meant to belong to the US courts. Like, it's not something that should be determined by our colonizer. It's really more of an issue that belongs in the international court system, that we can strategize with members of the international community. So with the work of the Fanohge Coalition, we're really looking at this as an opportunity. Like, for so long, the issue of self-determination was really tied up in the US court system and in the Davis case. And that really prevented us from doing a lot of organizing. And now that we're kind of free of that, like, we have so many more opportunities going forward with how we can strategize and how we can continue to build a stronger future for ourselves, both regionally and internationally. So, I mean, I think we're looking at a lot of options. In our initial letter that we wrote to the governor, we kind of urged her to both look into amending local laws around self-determination, but also really pursuing these like international avenues within the international court system. So I think there's a lot of possibilities right now. I think the most important part is that we don't lose this momentum and we continue to have conversations in spaces like these, continue to listen to like the youth in our community for what they want going forward, and really just keep our momentum up as we kind of navigate everything that's opened up for us now that we're outside of the US court system.
I think, yeah, it's sort of, on one hand, the way that it's talked about in the media, it comes across as very depressing, as like yet another defeat. But that's only if you're looking at this from the confines of like a US, constitutional perspective, right? And so in a way, I mean, the appeals request getting turned down is sort of, it can be liberating. And it also allows us to imagine and also embody other types of sovereignty, right? And so I guess like if I'm asking you guys, and I mean maybe particularly Manhope and Guåhan or Maria, representing GCC Eco Warriors, I mean the energy of young activists back there. I mean, what sort of energy is this creating, and what sort of possibilities do you guys envision for sovereignty?
I definitely feel like the energy has picked up a lot. Speaking for myself, since 2017, when I was newly educated on these issues, I was fired up. I was ready to fight the government, all that, just playing. But I think it's definitely picked up, and a lot of youth have took it upon themselves to educate themselves a lot more. And I think from here, it's only going to get better. I have a lot of hope in our youth. And yeah, Maria, any?
Yeah, I agree with her. I feel like this, with all of this, there's a lot of information that's a lot more accessible. And I mean, I grew up with my mom and my grandmother teaching me a lot. I grew up in a really critical household, and from a young age, I was learning a lot. And it's really cool to see a lot of other young people speaking out about the situation really articulately. This sense of community that I have with all the other young people who are fighting for the same thing. It's really inspiring, yeah.
Also, going back to the social media part, a lot of comments that I get from my peers and people younger are, social media is only for fun, this and that. But it's proven that social media has been one of the greatest tools that we have in this generation to push the education following those topics. So I feel if all of us continue to use our platforms as a tool for that, then the youth will keep going up in the energy around sovereignty and the whole movement.
Definitely. I don't think that I would be as knowledgeable in a lot of these situations if it wasn't for many of the group chats that share these really great opportunities and stuff with me. I do think that social media is a very, very powerful tool for expressing your thoughts on a situation like this.
Hey, Sam and Joe, one of the things you mentioned was sort of this two-pronged approach, right? I mean, looking at decolonization from a local legislation perspective and also reaching out to the international community. What are there examples that you guys are sort of tossing around as far as either of those outcomes, as far as how we can build decolonization, independence?
Speaking from here, talking about lands in LA, I think that it's really important, as Sarah Maria are saying, like to have social media, but also have critical education platforms like Fanachu be available to people like throughout diaspora. And also it shows that technology is not different from self-determination. And it kind of keeps this idea of like indigenous peoples like Chamoros and Filipinos, like us brown folks, like, you know, that we cannot like access social media and make it and innovate it. And that indigeneity is not about like this like ancient idea of people being stuck in time, but that there are new and evolving ways of self-determination that are ongoing that us Filipinos would also like to support, especially considering the ongoing movements that are happening around anti-terrorism bill in the Philippines right now and other sorts of critical actions against Filipino activists. Filipinos for Guåhan is also very connected to other folks, other Filipinos who are in solidarity with Kiai in Hawaii and other folks in the continent. So we're trying to build these solidarities, not just through like the public modes of solidarity, but also through everyday conversations and like sharing skills and different things of like how to be in solidarity with the different indigenous peoples and whose lands we call home.
Sam, anything in response to that, to the question or what Joe had to say?
Yeah, in terms of kind of the different avenues, I think like I'm not a legal expert for sure, but I can kind of share some things that I've heard or that we're kind of talking about within the coalition. I know in our letter, we received a response from the governor to our initial letter, and she said that she was looking at the International Court of Justice and I think like the Inter-American Court, which are the two kind of like international court systems that we could potentially pursue. Yeah, and Chamorro activists have always been really active with presenting before the United Nations. So I've been a part of those trips before. And that platform where we can give testimony before the international community, but also like while we're in New York, kind of meet with other delegates of different embassies and countries and strategize with them. So I think it's going to kind of be a mix of like as it always kind of is for movements with pursuing like legal action and having like our government continue to pursue this, but then also like on the grassroots level, like meeting with people kind of outside of these formal systems. I liked how Manny, you were talking about earlier, like different kinds of sovereignty. And I think we're seeing our people even kind of like enact the future that we're trying to build. Like within our movement now and within the way that we're doing organizing, we are in fact exercising sovereignty. Like the way that we are communicating with each other and the way that our people have shown leadership, like I think these are all ways that we're kind of showing that sovereignty is something that is within us and that we're capable of enacting with the way that things are going down in our movement. So that's really inspiring to see.
Awesome, thanks for that. All right, so we're actually, as we're streaming now, we're taking, we're continuing to take a lot of questions from the audience. But before we get into that, it's an interesting time. There's a lot of things going on simultaneously. We are, of course, in the middle of a global pandemic, which has exacerbated existing issues. Am I coming across okay? Am I cutting out? Okay. And at the same time, there are uprisings around the world, in Hong Kong, and particularly in our context, in the US with George Floyd and police brutality. And maybe this question is for any of you, by the way, but I mean, how does the movement in Guåhan connect to uprisings in the States and maybe even around the world?
Yeah, I mean, like what you were saying with the pandemic is just really illustrating a lot of the inequalities that are already in place, and kind of, I think we're being pushed kind of like the global community towards this sort of like breaking point where the pandemic has just kind of sharpened a lot of the things that we're already seeing. And like for Guåhan, I mean, like, I think our people had an understanding like that our relationship with the US military is unequal, but there was always this narrative that they provide security to us. But I feel like just having the Roosevelt ship here like a few weeks ago, and just with the military not even disclosing who on the base is infected or like what their numbers are with the virus, like that kind of shifting that notion of security on its head. So now we're seeing quite literally that the US military is a danger to us in our own community, and that our lack of ability to control our borders and to really like act from a place of sovereignty has really put us in this position where our lives are at stake and at risk. So in terms of uprising, I think a lot of people, like we were talking about social media earlier, like are able to connect with the Black Lives Matter movement, and then just thinking about like how Black movements have really strengthened, I think, self-determination movements globally. Like Black people have really powerfully allied with so many liberation movements around the world, and like so many like acclaimed Black activists and speakers have been really intentional about making those connections between racism, imperialism, and colonialism. So I'm hoping that as our people are kind of more tuned into a lot of the racism and brutality that we're seeing in the United States, that we can continue to make those connections. That racism is also a root of the colonization that we're dealing with here at home. And that kind of like sort of how broken the system is with how the police is functioning over in the US. Like, well, we may have issues of police corruption, but possibly like not, it's definitely not the same dynamic as what is happening in the US. Like our issues with the military are very connected. So I think we're just at this point where there is so much momentum, like we're seeing with Finogi, and social media is really just allowing us to kind of see that we're not isolated in these issues, and that this is really just something that all of us as a global community have to overcome.
Star or Maria? Joe, even?
Going off of what Sam said, with the people realizing from the Black Lives Matters movement and how it connects to our efforts here, I've definitely seen a lot of people realize that through social media, they see the connections, that how the whole American system is founded upon white supremacy, and they're realizing that needs to change here as well. Yeah, basically that's it. I've seen a lot of that realization.
I can also respond to that because I'm currently in a city that has the highest incarceration rate of Black and also Indigenous folks and undocumented folks in the whole nation. I think that a lot of what Black Lives Matter is showing is that racial injustices are a larger thing across the US empire, which includes the continent, but also includes Guåhan, and that there are different racialized systems, but also there's different like ways in which like the police work to like incarcerate and murder Black lives, but it also militarization also occupies Guåhan land in a different way. But it still shows that there are these larger connections in which the US US nation state relies on these kinds of like different ways of like pushing down marginalized people. And so I think like if we can make those connections while also acknowledging that there are crucial differences, it's important to see that like Guåhan is not just an isolated small island, but it's a part of a larger system. But it also means like can be so much more coalitions that can be built and that are being built. And like even in my program in gender studies and here at UCLA, a lot of people have been learning more about Guåhan, including Black feminists, who have taught me that like just because it's different doesn't mean we can't build coalitions, and that that's like a lot of like it's really inspiring and motivating for me as someone that's all alone out here in LA to have those kinds of partnerships and like crucial relationships being built when the system doesn't want us to build those relationships.
Yeah, and also building off of what Starlet was also saying, you know, I'm noticing like a lot of my classmates and stuff more speaking out about the situation and being able to realize, like she was saying, like this realization about what's going on and how the system really works, how it's just built on oppression, and how a lot of people are starting to realize that now is really, that's pretty inspiring to me, seeing how many people are really open, their eyes are being open to how messed up this system is and how it's really imperative that we do something about it.
All right. So let's see. It looks like we have a bunch of questions coming in, and we'll just, let's get to it before we get overwhelmed with a bunch of stuff. So the first question from the audience is self-determination the same thing as decolonization? And I think, do you want to say something about that?
Well, some people, it's easy to get mixed up between the two, but there is a difference between self-determination and decolonization. Basically, self-determination, the fight for self-determination is for the right to choose what happens, not necessarily whether or not it's decolonization or a free association or a statehood. Self-determination, it's determined, self-determination to determine whether or not we are a statehood or association or whatever we want to do, because it's our land, so we should be the ones determining what happens.
Thanks. Did anyone else want to answer that?
Maybe I also want to address some confusion that I've received before. A lot of people think that when we talk about decolonization, that it automatically means that we're talking about being independent. But I try to stir away from that first before talking about independence and educating them on what decolonization really is, which is separating from being a territory to choosing our political status, statehood, free association, and independence. So I think I'm glad that these confusions are being brought up, because it's definitely something that I get all the time, actually.
Mm-hmm. All right, second question is sustainability is so important. What can each of us do to make it happen in our lives? Anyone want to take that one? Maybe from GCC Eco Warriors, Maria?
So sustainability is very important, like you're saying, and there are many ways that you can try to incorporate being sustainable into your everyday life. I feel like sustainability goes hand in hand with decolonization and working towards, supporting local and maybe having an ideally circular economy. Ways that you can try to be more sustainable is probably purchasing from local businesses and stuff, people who they aren't constantly pushing out waste. Big corporations are constantly pushing out waste and stuff, like buying stuff from local vendors I think is a good example of a way that you can try to be sustainable.
All right, the next question. No, sorry, go ahead.
Real quick, that sustainability is also very important, that we know that it starts at home, just the littlest things like planting a little aloe vera thingy, to help you in all of those aspects. But yeah, it starts at home, and that will be, if we keep showing that we are starting from the roots, then we can change the world.
Sam, you had something to say about that?
Yeah, just building on what Maria was saying about how sustainability is really connected to decolonization. Like, the US military is one of the biggest polluters in the world. So I think, like, when we're talking about sustainability, it's also really important that we talk about the way that the military is contaminating our lands actively, the way that, like, the military being involved in all of these war games around the world, like what that does to the environment, to the lands of other indigenous peoples. And then just, like, so much of the way that our realities are as a colony really prevents us from being sustainable, because we're not able to make our own choices with how to cultivate our land and maintain relationships with it. Even things like the Jones Act, like, that make it really like force our reliance on food that comes from somewhere else, and makes it really difficult for us to be able to grow our own food in a way that's sustainable and healthy, and in a way that we can take care of ourselves. The fact that the military stole like most of our farmlands also contributes to that. So it's just, I think it's really impossible to have any type of conversation about sustainability without addressing the fact that we live under like military occupation, and it's really not possible for us to make these long-term choices so long as we don't have control over our lives and our land.
Definitely. And I do feel like there's all these little things that you can do, like we're mentioning, like these small things that you can do. But at the same time, the biggest contributor to pollution is the military, pumping out more than 500 countries worth of toxic waste. You know, with all the things that we do, if you really want to get to the problem head on, you have to work at demilitarization. It's such a big, important part of sustainability.
Yeah, and just jumping off of that, one of our members, Christina Oriano, who many folks here know, is working on the Guåhan Sustainable Culture, which provides food and such. So if you want to check it out, they are doing these things. In addition, please support your Chamorro-led orgs like Maria's org, GCC, Co-Warriors. I think that everybody is already like working on this stuff. It's just like amplifying it and supporting it further, so we don't have to keep relying on like imported foods. But yeah, it is definitely connected to sovereignty, and Filipinos also live on Guåhan's land. A lot of us are like construction workers, you know, working in the hotels, doing like what is often known as dirty work. So I think living off the land in a more sustainable way can also help Filipinos live healthier lives and not have to struggle every day, including because Filipinos often send home money back home to their families in the Philippines. To have a more sustainable way of like living, and that is also important for us.
What about, I guess, just spending a little bit more time on this topic really quickly. We talk about how the military is the largest polluter in the world. What about the businesses back home? You have hotels, restaurants. You know, how are they complicit in waste and in consumption and pollution? Any ideas on that?
Well, definitely it's a given that a lot of the single-use plastics and stuff that are coming from a lot of these hotels, there's a significant amount of like single-use shampoo bottles and all those little like toiletries that are coming in. That's a given. And a lot of these big industries are also pumping out a lot of waste. The tourism industry definitely contributes to a lot of pollution. And, you know, if you think about it further, not just tourism, but also the tourists themselves, you know, wearing sunblock and going into the ocean and getting like, it's very detrimental to the coral reefs as well. So we have that main problem here, but it stems into all these other things that can pollute like the oceans and as well.
I think we really just need to shift from valuing tourism to valuing ecotourism.
That's something that's sort of been practiced in places like Thailand, right? And in other rural areas and popular destinations. Is that, do you think that's a sustainable industry for Guam?
I think so, yes. I think another very good model that we can look at is Palau and how they value their environment and they value ecotourism, period. And it's doing, I see that it's doing really great for them. Anybody want to add on to that?
Right. No? Okay, cool. Well, wow, it looks like we have a bunch of questions now. The next one's pretty important. Are there any dance groups that are part of the coalition? I mean, dance groups, cultural practice is very big, and it's often it's a more socially acceptable form of self-determination and acknowledgement of through Chamoru people and culture and rights and all these things. Are there cultural groups that are part of the coalition? And if not, how can they get more involved?
I do not speak for them, but I have seen personally that do support the coalition, at least that I've seen at the march. And from social media members, I know some members of some dance groups and some instructors, and they are openly speaking about it. So I'm guessing that they do talk to their members about the movement, and I think that's a great thing. Because a lot of youth are interested. Usually, from what I've seen, how they get in touch with the culture now is a lot of the times through cultural tomorrow dance groups. So
Okay. All right. This might be kind of a fun one. If you could say anything to Dave Davis to his face, what would it be? And we'll start with Sam.
Honestly, I'm tired of like talking about him or centering him at all. Like, I think he's just one symptom of like a whole system that we're taking down. Like, I think like kind of shifting the energy away from what we would say to him to like what would we say to our future generations and like all that we've done since then. Like, just the fact that we've had like 2,000 people come out for this and how powerful that is, and like the generations of our people who have really dedicated their lives to like our future in this way, I feel is just so much more powerful than what like one settler has to say to us. That just like, honestly, I'm just over talking about it at this point, but I'll pass that on to someone else.
I think that it's also sort of detrimental to the movement, right? When the media can sort of sensationalize and center one white,
Right.
not really acknowledge that this is a larger structural, and so
Yeah.
it's more than about Dave Davis. I mean, he's a terrible person, but this is much larger than him.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so going on from that, I mean, everyone, the next question from the audience is, everyone this person knows is fired up about Black Lives Matter, but none of them are really interested in our local issues of justice. How can she talk to her friends about getting passionate about our own causes for justice? Sam?
That's a really great question. I think, yeah, like we were saying before, this is kind of a moment when a lot of people are really educating themselves, and just like here within our community, I think there's not a lot of education about like critical race theory and kind of like learning to talk about sort of the way like that oppressions are complicated and unique in their own ways, but also just really connected. And I think it's important that we both recognize that right now, what we can do in solidarity is just direct our attention and our focus and love and power to the Black Lives Matter movement and recognize that they need that solidarity. But then also like moving forward kind of in our community, recognizing that the issues that they're facing right now are really connected to ours, and the root of those issues being racism and imperialism and white supremacy, right? So understanding that the struggles that are happening right now, also just against the police, are connected to our struggles against the military. Like something that we were talking about, Josephine and I were talking about earlier while we were writing the solidarity statement, is that the Department of Defense both funds police in the United States and gives them equipment where they're able to go on and terrorize Black communities in these really horrifying ways, like we're seeing now through so much of it is getting filmed. But the Department of Defense, like that same funding source goes towards war games in our land and poisoning our waters. So just realizing like that is connected, and we have to constantly like, it's just a difficult line, I think, to be able to honor that these struggles are complex and unique in their own ways, but also really intrinsically connected. And I think that like finding that balance is where we can find power. So in those conversations moving forward, I would just urge, like, when you're talking about Black Lives Matter, to make those connections. Like, if we're speaking out about racism and understanding what it means in that context, what does it mean in the context here when Chamorro people are being told that we're racist for trying to have our vote to self-determine our future? Like, how is that same logic of racism functioning here in a different setting, right? And like, ultimately, who does that benefit? And looking back, that it benefits white supremacy. And also just really drawing the parallels between like what is behind all of this violence that we're seeing now, like stolen land on the US, and on top of that, the militarization of the police force, and all of that coming back to Guåhan with our lands also being stolen, and us also facing all of this violence from the Department of Defense. So I think just looking, kind of turning these conversations into how does racism function within our community, and how is it being used against the Chamorro people, and how are these violences connected?
Anyone else on that question?
I think Samantha's right. And again, like a lot of people will see the situation and feel like it's not really their place or their situation to fight. But it's definitely, it's not like a white versus black thing. It's more of a everyone versus discrimination type thing. And hopefully seeing this and seeing how much of an injustice this is, people will be able to realize this more, and hopefully whoever asked that question's friend, I'm hoping that they will be able to realize how oppressive the system is from this.
All right. Let's see. Next question. There are valid points to this next question, but I mean, it comes from a place of frustration, and yeah, the person is asking, why isn't this energy going to getting money into the hands of the needy? Waste of time. And I mean, there is, I know, it's a valid question in regards to the fact that like a lot of working class people back home don't have the time or resources to engage with a lot of the political theory and all these things that go into the decolonization movement, right? And I mean, for a lot of people, yeah, they're worried about where they're going to get their next meal, and yeah, like how are they going to support themselves and their families? How does decolonization benefit working class people back home? And are there active efforts right now in any of the groups that are involved with the coalition to get resources to people who are suffering right now?
There have been efforts from many, one of my organizations in particular, Hagan, Famalao'an, Guåhan. Definitely, it's dedicated to foster, like I was saying, to having the community, the social welfare of the community, like good. And there has been there's actually currently a donation going on where anyone who has any cotton fabrics can donate to us at our donation pickup areas, Asiga, the Talafofo Mayor's office, and the GDOE office. And we're going to be doing a project where we make a bunch of fabric masks and donate them to families and people in our sister islands. We're going to be making like care package type things with masks and stuff. And one of our long-term goals is to raise funds to provide resources for Chamorro women. So we're definitely trying to make an effort to provide resources to people, because a lot of people don't have any. And so people who are able to have these resources and are able to engage in these things, we are definitely trying to do our part to give as well.
Sam, Star, Joe, anyone? Oh, okay.
Oh, I can go. Yeah, one of my favorite quotes from the Black feminist Audre Lorde is that we don't live single issue lives. So I think that really relates to this question, and that like issues of poverty and like poor health outcomes that are going on in our community are ultimately really connected to going back to like what is the root of the problem here, which is colonization. And I believe that decolonization is really the only way that our people can meaningfully kind of mobilize out of poverty. And just like we were discussing earlier, like so many of the problems that plague our community is because of military presence here. Like, and just like the high rates of cancer in our community can be connected to like toxic militarization of our land and waters, our inability to feed ourselves and really care for ourselves in sustainable ways also go back to that. But yeah, I mean, also just so many people who are involved in the Fanohge Coalition and in a lot of other groups in our movement are really dedicated to caring for our people in different ways. I think decolonization is often kind of written off as this sort of abstract issue, like, oh, we can deal with that later. Like once we take care of everything that's like in the news headlines right now. But ultimately, it's just like decolonization is the fabric that's creating all of the problems in our everyday lives. And we have to kind of have this mindset of thinking about the next generations and thinking into the future. And like, if we don't address this now, like our next generations will continue to live in the conditions that we're living in now, like in these conditions of poverty, growing up believing that we don't really have any worth or value unless we have value to the United States, like not being able to control what happens to us and control what happens to our islands. So I think we just need to remember like, what do all of these problems have in common, and how can self-determination be a way to respond meaningfully to that?
Yeah,
Definitely.
Sorry, you can go, Maria.
Go ahead. Okay.
Yeah, go ahead.
Short term, it does feel like a waste of time. It definitely can feel like a waste of time. But like I agree with Samantha that honestly, if we do want to mobilize and be able to support ourselves, the only road to that, all the roads leads to demilitarization and decolonization. And of course, again, short term, it does feel like a waste of time and money, but in the long term, it's something that is necessary and it has to happen.
Yeah, building off of Maria and Sam's points, I was thinking about how like the Jones Act and other colonial policies affect the everyday conditions of like how people live in Guåhan, like how so expensive it is to live. And like, you know, when I came here and I was like, strawberries are not $6. Wow. And like, you know, that's a structural issue of what policies keep Guåhan dependent on the larger things. And I think that that's a part of like the colonial situation. So, and like, you know, the fact that so many people are facing cancer when they're 50, that's not normal. I left Guåhan and I was like, that's really not normal. It's a condition of survival. So I think that if we work towards decolonization, even for Filipinos that, you know, are not indigenous to Guåhan, but still live in Guåhan and have, and also suffer from the colonial conditions in different ways, that, you know, this is like also an issue of like making sure that we continue to survive and actually begin to thrive in a different way. And I do believe that comes with Chamorro-led decolonization, and that thinking about different alternatives to don't rely on these structural dependencies that keep Guam poor and dependent on the United States.
For sure. All right, next one. Let's see. Okay. Oh, all right. So what sort of responses have you guys received from leadership in Guåhan? Sam, your feedback that you've gotten from the international community. Yeah, because, you know, part of this, you know, the two-pronged approach again is changing local legislation to create sovereignty, and also looking at the international community for support and recognition in those spaces. So yeah, what sort of responses have you guys received?
Yeah, so we've received a letter back from the governor, and in that letter, she kind of said that she is committed to pursuing this issue moving forward and would like to sort of talk with us more as well. We also received a similar letter from Josephine Barnes, who said that she wanted to set up a meeting with us. We're receiving more feedback from senators as well. I think, Josephine, you're working on that survey, right, for the senators? Yeah, so I know Josephine had started a survey so senators can respond just whether or not they support Chamoru self-determination. So I think kind of trying, where we're at right now is really still soliciting support and responses from our elected leadership. But I really just think it's so powerful that we had thousands of people marching in support with this, that we're really in a position where what our people want is clear, and we've demonstrated that in so many ways, and we'll keep demonstrating that. So what our leaders really need to do is just listen to us and listen to where the majority of kind of the support and opinions are coming from. And I think there's sort of this continual criticism in our community, which I think is lessening now, but kind of this idea that we're in the minority, or activists for Chamoru self-determination are in the minority. But if we look at what happened with the Finogi March and just the outpourings of support that have happened since then, I think our community has been really clear in saying that this is an issue that's important to us, and we demand that our elected leaders take it seriously and that they're committed to working with us moving forward.
Maybe just to, aside from local leaders, I mean, I know that as activists, one of the first instances that a lot of us engage in these discussions is with our families who may or may not agree with our newfound stances on these issues. Since each of you have been involved, what sort of responses have you gotten from your family members? Has there been anything that surprised you in the past couple of years, or what's going on?
Well, I've never really I kind of grew up with my family, like I was saying before. I grew up in a household that was really critical of a lot of with a lot of issues of capitalism and stuff like that. And so it was really my mom would take me to a lot of these marches and rallies and stuff, and my grandmother and my papa and everyone always encouraged me to learn and read. And so it's just something that my family kind of grew me up with.
I think with my experience, I had a more aggressive experience. How I dealt with that was patience, and a lot of patience, and a lot of understanding of why they don't understand. Especially with my family members that are in the military, who are now actually very supportive of the movement. I think it just takes patience, and every family is different. So my advice is just to understand why they don't understand, and to just keep your foot on the gas, when talking to your family, and just be compassionate. I know sometimes it's very hard, especially when they're just attacking you, or if they may be attacking you and you're just trying to politely, educate. But a lot of patience, a lot of compassion and understanding is what got me through those conversations. And I'm really grateful that, I stuck with it. It was worth it. So
that's a lot of really good advice. It's really important to remember that some people don't have the knowledge and awareness to know this, to realize the significance of the situation. And so honestly, the only way around that is listening to them and then trying to educate them why it's otherwise. Yeah.
Okay. In relation to the last question, what brought each of you to your own consciousness of the situation and made you want to speak out on these issues? Most Chamorus are Mamalao AF. I don't know if that's a new hashtag. It can be. But yeah, so how did you come into proximity with these ideas?
I love that question because a lot of people can relate, at least the people that I've talked to. For me, it took being away from home and missing it so much, and then coming back and realizing like what's really going on and what I've been missing. Also, I want to shout out to one of my high school teachers, Senor Eckley, who was very on top of letting his students know what's really going on, you know, despite him potentially even getting in trouble for it. I think he even has gotten in trouble for it before. But I think we need a lot more of those teachers because his lectures is what helped me open my eyes, and that's what got the fire going and how Manhope para Guåhan even started. So yeah, it just takes that seed, you know, for somebody to plant and for it to just, and after that, I just kept watering it, you know, indulging myself in the reading. Social media helped a lot. You know, I started following like a lot of Chamorro activists and groups and stuff, and just taking the initiative and helping plant those seeds some more. So, yeah.
Awesome. Sam, Joe?
Yeah, I think many of us kind of came of age also within the context of the military buildup. So I feel like for me, like learning about the buildup and what was happening, and that the military like planned to take even more of our land, and just what we were learning about like soldiers being stationed here, and kind of like the violence that had followed them at different bases where they were stationed, like all of that was really alarming. And like going back to like that idea of like many in our community think of colonization as something that's abstract, like what learning about the military buildup and seeing the impacts of that did for me was like really just bring it into the present tense, that like colonialism is active, it's something that shapes a lot of our history, but it's also something that's still happening. And just like I think for a lot of us, like I know Star, you were really involved with like Protege the Texan and those movements and what was going on with like us realizing that we're going to continue to lose access to these places that we love and that we've like grown up experiencing. That kind of like shocked me into it. And then just really making those connections. Like my family is from Sumai. I grew up in Santa Rita, like right next to the military base, and kind of like driving past daily and just realizing that like this like the way that the military takes our land and kind of forces us outside of it is something that will continue to happen if we don't take an active part in trying to reclaim who we are as a people. And I think just like on the question of family, like I don't like we're not the first generation to resist either. And the way that resistance has happened in different generations, I think we also have to recognize and honor that maybe some of the ways that like our grandparents or our ancestors practice resistance like aren't ways that we recognize immediately, but like that it's not something that started with social media or like with this like new kind of awareness either. Because like I think about like my tata was like in the US military, and he kind of grew up post-war with that attitude of like we need to be grateful for them, but at the same time like he would beat up like white men in the village who would like take advantage of Chamorro women. So I think there was always this understanding of like, maybe it wasn't articulated as like independence or decolonization, but there was just always this understanding in our people that we need to protect ourselves. And the way that our generation is realizing it is that the way that we can do that best is if we separate from the US and kind of join the world on our own, and if we really take a strong stance for ourselves. So I think recognizing that resistance has looked really different in the past and depending on what circumstance people were in, but Chamorro people have always resisted and we will continue to do so.
All right, we're coming up on an hour. So I want to move through these next couple questions pretty briefly. First of all, we have a shout out from Puerto Rico in solidarity. And so that's always good to hear, always good to see. Our struggles are connected and we must support each other, you know, at all turns. So the next question I want to grapple with is, people react to these issues are based on their limitations, influenced by culture, worldview, education, miseducation. How do we change people's limitations and in turns their minds and reactions? I'll take one response from the panel. So Joe, Star.
I can answer that. So I think that, like, you know, podcasts like this are important. Everyday conversations with your family, reaching out to folks, like looking up things in Guampedia, reading critical news, you know, like thinking about like these different perspectives and ongoing histories as important. And having it like, you know, I know not everybody sits with this kind of conversation in the dinner table, but sometimes you gotta try. And, you know, like, I think that because decolonization is a persisting thing that affects people's everyday lives, from the price you pay for your groceries to like where you're able to move within Guåhan, we can't even access some of that land, 1/3 of Guåhan's land. And to have these everyday conversations, I think begins to change people's minds. Like, I grew up like very conservative and privileged, and it was through like moving to Boston and being in conversation with Black, Brown, and other Asian activists that I started realizing what's wrong with Guåhan. And in the process, like, became more critical and like started reaching out to folks like the Manny, and other folks became my good friends. And I think through that, you know, like, everybody starts off from somewhere, and so being compassionate towards other people, but also realizing that like this is an everyday conversation thing. And if you get frustrated, you can always talk to other folks. You can always reach out to me or any of us. My inbox is open if you want to talk more through these things. But yeah, it's definitely an ongoing thing. It's a difficult thing, but there's a community to support you and to support other folks who want to learn through these things.
Joe, one more question. The Filipino diaspora who are on Guam, I mean, one of the issues that each of us has faced is the fact that people like Dave Davis and his legal representatives, I mean, they've sort of weaponized the Filipino community against Chamoru sovereignty. What is the best way that you've found to help the Filipino community engage with this issue, and maybe even thinking about engaging other ethnic communities on Guam and helping people see that decolonization benefits more than just Chamoru people, but all of us who call Guam home?
Yeah, so Filipinos for Guåhan is trying to organize workshops and ongoing conversations within our community. We're still working on this, so if anybody wants to get involved, please let me know. But I do think the general connections between the Philippines and Guåhan having the same colonizers, but one is technically independent, but is it really independent? And Guåhan still being a colony or an incorporated territory is like, shows that like there's still ongoing efforts to and needed solidarity, but also I think like the importance that when we wrote the statement in response to Dave Davis, like Sam, I don't really like centering him, but he never consulted us when he made those claims. Like, he never talked to Filipinos. He spoke for us, just like the colonizers spoke for us when they signed Guåhan and the Philippines over to the US in the Treaty of Paris in 1898. That's an ongoing colonial injustice. And I think like what Filipinos for Guåhan is trying to do is, you know, mobilize folks who have grown up in Guåhan, but also who have recently migrated and would like to, you know, like find a better future. What that is Chamoru that leads to like more sustainable everyday living conditions that don't rely on like these difficult jobs in construction or tourism industry that keep everybody in Guåhan poor, but most especially deprive Chamorros and dispossess Chamorros on their own homelands. That also led to for Filipinos, it also led for us to be dispossessed from our homeland. So if anything, that's another connection that is born from mutual, the interconnected colonial histories.
Mm-hmm. And that also goes into sort of our next question, which it's kind of long, and if I'm trying to interpret it, the audience member is stating that there needs to be some sort of maturity, like cultural maturity among the community. And I guess what he means by that, he or they mean by that, is Chamoru seeing themselves as part of Micronesia. And they're also asking about how racism is embodied on Guam against FSM migrants, people from Chuk, Ponape, etc. Star, Sam, Maria, do you guys want to jump on that? Like, how does the movement, how do we engage with racism, with anti-racism, I'm sorry, against FSM migrants back home? What can we do to support those communities?
I do feel like, I'm still a student, and I see a lot of the racism play out against people from outer islands when I go to school every day. And I do feel like it's really important that we acknowledge that, it's not like we are all a part of Micronesia and Oceania, and I do feel like we need to acknowledge that. And I have a lot of friends from outer islands, friends who are Chukis, Palauan, and Pohnpeian, and who fight for who are in this fight with me as well, who I would invite to a protest and they attend with me. And I do feel like it's important that we try not to have this, I don't even know what the word is, this messy stuff between us. If anyone wants to jump on that question as well.
A lot of messy stuff, as it were. There's a lot of, because of colonization and our proximity, Chamoru proximity to the United States, there are things like colorism that play out that influence how our structures discriminate against FSM migrants, and poor people, poor Chamoru, poor Filipinos, just poor people across the board, so those are things that we need to grapple with as well. Moving on, let's see. There's a lot of really good questions here, guys, but the one I want to get into is big businesses and power hoarders on island are after this independence to recolonize you and monopolize our cost of living. The best way to do this is to infiltrate our higher institutions and young minds. This movement is a part of that. So I guess it's actually a critique of the movement itself as being sort of bourgeois. I guess reinterpreting that, how do we prevent the movement from being co-opted, commodified? Because there are people who will try and resell us, the idea of sustainability and make it about individual consumption as opposed to the military's pollution consumption. So how do we prevent our movement from being infiltrated?
I mean, that happened to the Philippines already. That's exactly what happened to the Philippines after 1898. I guess another question would be learning from the Philippine nation states' mistakes and how that's led to the persisting global migration of Filipinos. I grew up privileged, but most Filipinos don't. So many Filipinos every corner of the world, so many Filipinos' lives are in danger because of COVID. Many of them are nurses and care workers. And 2 folks just died in Los Angeles. So I think, don't let those big businesses take over the decol movement. Don't let them appropriate it, because it's about everyday conditions, making sure people thrive. And businesses don't want that. Big businesses don't want that. There are social enterprises that actually care about the community, that are sustainable businesses in Guåhan. And honestly, I'm afraid that big businesses could actually ruin them, especially in this age of COVID. So I think it's important to support those who actually care about the whole community livelihoods, not just like, you know, getting a profit off of people or the land and water.
Star?
I really only have one simple thing to say to that is we need to stop electing capitalism loving people. You know, I think it can be as simple as that. Yeah.
Awesome. I agree. Let's stop electing capitalism loving people. So the next question that I want to get into is talking about, we sort of hear this a lot already, right? The person is essentially asking like, if the US, if we become independent of the US, or not even just independent, but if we decolonize from the US, who will be there to protect Guam? And it's this idea that the US military provides actual security for the island. But you know, there are other ways of looking at what security is and what it could be. And you know, it's the idea of genuine security. So Sam or Joe, did you guys want to jump on that?
Yeah, I think like looking at the way that the military has behaved recently with the Roosevelt and then moving those sailors not on base, but like into our own community, like these are just kind of the most recent examples of that we can see as like evidence that the military is really looking out for themselves and not looking out for our community. That so long as we are a colony, we can't even enter into any kind of an equal partnership with them because they don't have to ask our consent to kind of carry things out this way. It's not required of them because of the way things are right now. I think also just like looking back at examples in our history, like why were islands invaded during World War II? It was because of US presence here. It was nothing that our people did. Why was North Korea threatening to bomb Guam like a few years ago? It was because of things that the United States president said. It wasn't things that our people said. So just like, if you look at our history, if you look at contemporary examples, everything points to our islands have been in danger because of things that people in power in the US have said and done and because of their decisions. So really, the US's presence in our islands has only ever meant danger for us. And I think we just need to remember that going forward, that they're not offering us security right now. So we shouldn't think of ourselves as back into this corner as like, this is the situation we're ever gonna get because they're not offering us anything. So I think just remembering that and remembering our histories and being mindful of that going forward.
Awesome. All right, last question. Decolonization is not just political, economic, or cultural, but it's psychological as well. And a huge part of decolonization is getting rid of the colonial mentality. What are you guys' thoughts on that?
I feel like that's actually, I agree with that, the idea that of a colonial mentality. There have been many times, you know, and again, as a student, you know, I notice what one may call a colonial mentality with a lot of my peers. A lot of, you know, I'll hang out with my friends and talk to them, and I'll notice like a lot of like what they think, what their mindset is fixated on. A lot of you know, I have a lot of close friends who feel like that their worth is like more if they go to the mainland. I have a lot of I know a lot of people who feel like it's a lot more significant. They are more significant if they are out in the States, and whatever they're doing out there, that makes it somehow like valid, you know? So I do notice that a lot of people have what you could call a colonial mindset.
Yeah, and Filipino psychologist EJR David originally talked about colonial mentality as like Filipinos always wanting like what is American. And it's in his book, Brown Skin, White Minds. Filipinos, you know, are brown, but there's actually different shades of Filipinos like me, so that are a bit lighter. But yeah, I think that like, you know, Du Bois was a Black psychologist, as talked about as double consciousness, which I know is one of the questions as well. But you know, it's like this idea that like through colonial education that like the colonized needs the colonizer to live, and that, you know, we're inferior, and that the educational system kind of creates this. So I think that like everyday conversations and also like critical education is important to think through it, that it's a structural issue, it's not people's fault, and that we can change the government for like, and we can change other things like that there is like, if there is corruption, that it can change through like social justice and like ongoing movements like the Fanohge Coalition. And I don't know if others want to jump in on that.
What do you guys think is I mean, one of the things that maintain the colonial mentality is the media that we consume, right? I mean, there's on Guam, there's Pacific Daily News, The Post, KUAM. What sort of messages come across to you guys as those that perpetuate the colonial mentality?
I can't really pinpoint as what a certain or particular anything in particular. I do feel like it's just a lot of small things as a whole, like all these small things feeding into people, making them think in that way. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. I do feel like it's a lot of small things, a bunch of really subtle things that kind of perpetuate people more.
Yeah. Star?
I noticed that a lot of Chamorros and even just Pacific Islanders in general, we don't feel, or a lot of us don't feel empowered enough by our own histories and our own cultures to feel like we could accomplish things without Western colonization. And I think, I think a lot of them aren't, what's the word? There's like this inferiority complex going on, like thinking that our culture is not, you know, all that in a way. So I think when we properly educate them about, you know, our histories and the accomplishments of our ancestors more than the accomplishments of whatever we're learning, like how we learn US history more and we celebrate US holidays more than our own, we can definitely help with the getting rid of that colonial mentality.
All right, I think I've eaten up enough of you guys' time, but really quickly, someone in the chat asked what resources you guys would recommend. There's, because of what's going on in the States right now, there is a lot of focus on Black liberatory readings, authors. Is there literary works from the Pacific that you guys would recommend that help shape your thinking? And so if you guys can give me 2 resources that we can put in the description after we end the live stream here, and also any shout outs, anything going on?
I do want to shout out again the fabric drive that's going on with with the organization I'm a part of, Hagan, Famalao'an, Guåhan. I do want to just point that out again. I do encourage anyone who has any new or slightly used cotton fabrics to donate to our locations. Again, ASIGA, the Talafofo Mayor's office, as well as the GDOE office in Tizan. If anyone has any fabric, I would really appreciate the donations for masks. Thank you.
Awesome. Joe? Star?
So this is resources for Black Lives Matter, right?
Yeah, or things that have helped shape your thinking.
Oh, things that have helped. Well, I can't really speak on that, but if anybody wants to come out, there is a protest happening tomorrow to stand in solidarity with the Black Lives Matter, and it's organized by my 2 friends. I'll just give their @. They said that you can DM them if you have any questions, or even talk about it with them tomorrow at the protest. It's going to be at Agania Chief Kapua statue at 5 p.m. And their @names are @Tal from CP. And sorry, I can't remember this off the top of my head. And XSXXTALYSA. Yeah.
Cool. So we'll include that info in the description as well. And that's tomorrow at 5 p.m., right? The solidarity protests. Okay, sweet. Sam?
In terms of resources, I would encourage people, Independent Guåhan, every month for our General Assemblies, we put together like an education packet, honoring people in our history who have contributed to the movement, and like looking at different examples of independent nations and how things have worked out from them and what we can learn from them. So all of those, I think, a lot of those resources are available on our social media. You can also reach out for us if you want more. I remember we did one GA on like Chamorro revolutionary literature. Maybe I can link the PDF to that in the comments there, because I don't have those names off the top of my head. But I know there's a lot of resources out there. I would also just encourage people to talk to their own families, like we talked about a lot throughout, like listen to your own family stories. Oral histories are really valuable. Yeah, and like take the time if you're not finding resources like to kind of help create them. I think we're also in a moment where there's a lot going on and we have a lot to say, and we need people to continue to write our stories down and document our movement. So that work is also really important.
Also,
Yeah, go ahead, Sam.
Just if there's any youth out there listening, you can follow us on Instagram at Youth for Guam. We just started getting active again on our social media. I know it's been a while, but we will be posting a lot more educational information, announcements, ways that you can help, and resources that you can learn from. We also want to push a lot for more youth engaging in a lot of traditional art. We want to recognize those youth. So yeah, follow us on Instagram. We will be updating that more often.
Awesome. Youth for Guam. All right, Joe?
I just want to echo to support all of the things that Star, Maria, and Sam are doing. I think that like as Filipinos standing in solidarity and like, standing behind but not in front of like everything that Chamorro activists, especially Chamorro women, are leading are very important. Filipinos for Guåhan is also going to start organizing more like workshops. So if you're interested in that, please get involved. And I'm a historian by training. I'm a PhD student in gender studies. So I learned a lot from my advisor, Keith Camacho, was watching this. Shout out to him. And like also Miguel and other folks. And also like, to be honest, everyday conversations I've had with my friends, whether it be at the bar or an independent Guåhan protest. So I think that, that those everyday conversations, I just want to echo the importance of that. And for Filipinos, find out more about Filipinos history in Guam. Watch the documentary on Camp Rojas. You can find it online. It's like there's a preview of 30 minutes about our histories. There's also a Guampedia article and a Vince Diaz's article, Bye Bye Miss American Pie. And also the Independent Guåhan July 2017 podcast where you can watch me blink once per second. It's pretty hilarious. But also talk about Philippine revolutionary history's connection to Guam, which is more important. But yeah, so yeah, reach out to me if you have any questions or want to get involved with Filipinos for Guåhan as well.
Well, I want to thank you guys for participating in today's show, and want to thank viewers and listeners like you. Don't forget that this is made possible by your donations. So if you again are in the position to do so, please support Fanachu at patreon.com/Fanachu, and we will see you guys again next week. Adios.
Yes.